Good morning to everyone, and thank you for your participation in this presentation. There are quite a few people here, so I'm happy. I will introduce today two elements. First of all, to try and clarify some of these acronyms and what are the needs for the different businesses and for today's challenges, and also to look at new approaches in terms of cybersecurity that allow to counteract some of the concerns we have linked to lack of resource on one hand, and also to try and face these topics having a different approach that is one that is not non-destructive. The last period we had a lot of acronyms in terms of cybersecurity. The Gartner is not here for nothing. Oftentimes it comes out with new acronyms and explains that that's the future. What we realize is that in some cases they're not completely right, because the reality evolves in a different way from what they have had, and we'll come back to this later on. So just a few words about myself. My name is Christophe Auberger. I am in Fortinet for a few years now, and I'm in charge of cybersecurity to try and take this positioning, and also to animate the different user groups and the different groups that work in cybersecurity in France. So a few words on Fortinet. So what's the mission of Fortinet? We are a cybersecurity actor for the last 22 years. If we try to look at the mission of Fortinet, we see that it's to bring trust to the digital world and to enable the use of the digital in complete trust. And beyond this is to secure people, the equipment, the data, and perhaps the data being the main element today, because that's really what's valuable in companies. And that's really what those who are attacking are looking for in terms of weaknesses, whether they're part of criminal groups or sponsored by some kind of dependency or state. So this world, its missions will go around 5 axes. 2 that are quite interdependent. We talk a lot about digital transformation, even though it doesn't really mean anything. What we have to really see is that the digital transformation is not just turning automation from things that we were doing manually before, so pencil and pen before. It's another way of doing business. It's really improve time to market, have better services, being closer to the client. So it's really what has a better interest for the companies. And obviously, companies go in this direction. We have said a lot that during this pandemic and the sanitary crisis has really transformed this digital journey. But already things were quite in this direction in the past. And a lot has gone into the direction of remote working. And because obviously everyone was really forced to go into remote work, and companies had to find solutions, and they had to really increase the scope and the scale of this. And even though companies really already had these kind of activities, but obviously it's different from having 5% of the collaborators to 100%. This digital transformation is often linked to the cloud. It's oftentimes the example of the chicken and the egg. But the migration of the cloud is really a component of this digital transformation. And the 2 aspects, perhaps the strengths, on one hand, we have attacks that are really much more targeted, a lot more sophisticated. And this is because the cyber criminal world is really going into this direction, is specializing. And a few years ago, you didn't maybe need to have a lot of skills in computers to drive an attack. You just needed to have a bit of money and to rent a platform and to rent some resources. And this means that these platforms are created and maintained by specialists now. And the sophistication of attacks has gone up. And this shows that there are more and more attacks that really come to fruition. And these attacks are quite sophisticated, and they come about with complex mechanisms. and they're quite a lot more successful usually. On the other hand, in front of this attack, of this threat, we have the surface of digital action that's quite larger, so there's a lot more area. And obviously, those were the decision makers wanted to put in place processes to push companies and organizations to really be able to prevent this kind of risk. So there's an aspect of being in conformity with some norm, and we talk about NES and V2, and we talk about GDPR, and all of this is really globally. And then in each sector, there are really more specific aspects, from financial, in the health sector, and so on. So really, there's a pressure from the regulation point of view. The last point, which is obviously not very small, there is we're lacking the kind of resources and capacity in the cyber world, and it's difficult to find more resources, and it's hard to maintain them. So it's a pity that these people are doing tasks that do not really have an added value. So we have to really preserve these resources, and perhaps that's the easiest way to go against this lack of competence. So this goes into all the sectors, all companies, with a number of important points like mobility. I was talking about the sanitary crisis earlier. This was obviously a very important point. And most probably it will stay in the long run in our habits, perhaps not 100% as it was during the strong moments of the lockdowns, but there is a part of home remote work that will remain. The other aspect are connected objects, and there are a lot of these in the industry with many users and predictive maintenance, and we find this also in the health sector with a lot of equipments that are interconnected, not always recognized by the internal services. And this is really developing everywhere with a massive utilization of connected objects. And these work well, otherwise we wouldn't use them, but the surface of data is increasing a lot. And moreover, because security by design is not always what's ahead, was in front in priority. So many objects are vulnerable, and there's many of them. And so the mass factor creates the situation that even if you don't have many vulnerable ones, it simplifies the risk. In terms of conformity, I talked about it earlier. What we talk about borderline, edge computing, this notion that we find everywhere. What does this mean? That we have this capacity to treat the data and we kind of put it everywhere closer to the users. And this is for agility, for the speed, for ergonomics of these applications. But this increases obviously the risk because we have resources that are treating this that are everywhere, and they could be compromised and used for ends for which they were not initially designed for. And if we do this, it's also to improve something that has become important, which is the experience of the user. This is a very important point today. This user experience, it really is the heart of the company. And what it means is that we can deploy security, and we must deploy security, but we have often to do it with loss to the security. And so the security should not reduce the ergonomics of the services that the users will be able to use, the user friendliness. And so even the kind of network, what we have in terms of access is becoming easier. There are places in the dark web that are easier. We can buy vulnerabilities, and you can buy complicit elements that are very easy to put in place. I'm not saying it never existed, but today it's really structured, and it's really easy for cyber criminals to access these resources. And so in terms of how sophisticated this become, we feel it that they're becoming a lot more sophisticated and strong. So obviously, in this world, we realize that for a while, the cybersecurity, what is happening? We're deploying technology because from a technological point of view, we don't know how to do anything else. That's the only solution we have. We can't really find a miracle solution that will allow us to prevent these kind of risks. And so we will deploy different solutions to protect web resources and applications that will be spread, and we will use technology to protect emails and data centers and resources that are in public clouds. So really, we will be forced to use technology. And all of this is not really coherent. On average, in France, there are 15 different security applications. So there are 15 products that are deployed, 15 products to maintain, to integrate. So as we can see, it's quite heavy in terms of time. And as people are doing this, they're not really taking care of security. And so we're really wasting resources. The idea to delegate all of this is not new. The idea of the web was to have a global vision that was consolidated. Unfortunately, even if CM is really responding to many of these problems, this function of integration and consolidation really wasn't really part of it, was lost a bit. So what Gartner said in 2021, and as every year they talk about big trends for the future, they say that as of 2022, you will see a big trend that's cybersecurity mesh architecture, which is a platform architecture. And most of the cybersecurity actors are talking about this platform. And it's a hybrid approach. It's not silo anymore. That one is not really very up to date anymore. And the sum of the aggregates is not the same amount as it was before, because we lose this complexity. So this approach that goes towards platforms and frameworks, and we can call them as we want, these mesh architectures, as Gartner talks about it. So we were quite happy with this, because for the last 10 years, we've been talking about this approach and promoting it. And we integrated something that we call this Fortinet Security Fabric. That is exactly this. And we realized that in the companies, people need simplicity. They need to delegate. They need to integrate security components. And these silo approaches are really quite problematic. So the Gartner, as we're in it, defines also something else. In 2021, even before, it was talking about SASE. It's saying tomorrow the security will be managed as service on the cloud, and people will go in this direction. And what we realize, first of all, Gartner kind of reviewed their copy, saying that it's not exactly the way it will take place. We have today a false SASE, which is a kind of SASE that has different forms. It's more there's one for the network that will look at agility of the network, an intelligent network, aggregation, what we can call SD1, and then another one that's centered on security, what we will find zero trust access functions, security web gateway functions, and so on. CASB, and this will probably merge. The merge of these two functions in reality is not really linked to the evolution of technology, but more to the organization of companies. These two aspects will only migrate if teams are able to merge, and if they're quite at least close one to the other to manage this in one way. So in reality, it's a type of the full SASE. In reality, we put everything in the cloud, whatever the environment. We don't think that's the way it will be. We think it will be more hybrid, because in reality, on a small entity for remote working, it's really interesting, because we will give them access to the resources of the company without having developed and deployed anything, and bringing security through mechanisms on the cloud. However, when we talk about the main office, when we have 7,500 users on a site, then we can put everything on the cloud to have security. But I doubt we wouldn't need local security. I doubt that we wouldn't need a segmentation or protect specific resources. So we will perhaps have a hybrid environment that will be closer to SD1 on big sites and something like SASE on small sites. And obviously, the limitation is that the controller of all of this will be on the cloud in terms of availability and ease of deployment, and then we'll try and deploy it in a transparent way. And this is what we see in the different approaches today of different clients. So if we add all of this up, we're quite happy, because this is the description, the exact description of what we're suggesting of Fortinet Security Fabric, this platform approach that will allow us to integrate and delegate different security elements in a unified environment that's intelligent. So this is something that is interesting. And so how do we do it? We will base ourselves on different technological pillars that will respond to different needs. It's not new out of the hat. We didn't wake up one morning and decided to develop it, but it comes out of 22 years of development. And for the past 10 years, we try to integrate the different functions amongst them and to constitute this framework. The technological pillars are three. They're technical ones, and they will respond to the different problematics of cybersecurity. One is in terms of convergence of network and security. So is the network piloted by security? And so these are the functions like SD1, STACI. It's this capacity to respond to the needs, agile needs of the network in terms of the business, but also in terms of security, because we don't want to dissociate these two. And it's not easy to deploy intelligent networks without having security in it. The second one are zero trust access. And because there is less and less trust in the network, so this zero trust, I don't really like this wording, zero trust, because we're putting everything behind this term, but it's the approach that allows to make sure that the person who's connecting is really the person that they're pretending to be, and to double check what kind of means they're accessing the information, and then to see what kind of access are given, perhaps not give the same access to someone who's connecting to the resources of the company from a hardware that's part of the company, or someone who's connecting from a hotel or from their house, from a family tablet. The risk is not the same, the consequences are not the same, so perhaps there will be different accesses with respect to this. The third technological pillar, we said that the technological transformation is, amongst other things, the adoption of cloud. And so we have to secure the cloud with an important dimension of this dynamic portion, because a part of the cloud is this agility, is the ability to add and remove different parts with respect to the need and the timing. We can imagine, for example, at the end of the month, we have big resources linked to a provider cloud and then stop them because all these tasks are finished. And so security has to go along the way, because we can't have a big kind of application if we then have reverse engineering to try and have a security on it. So we have to have this agile aspect. And as we deploy the resources, we have the security that goes alongside with predefined rules that we will have set up ahead of time. So this is for the really technological part. And then there are two pillars that are very important. The first one is the operational management of security. And perhaps this is increased by artificial intelligence. And again, I don't like really this term AI, because we realize that it's not as intelligent as we thought. But the good news is that what is easy for the machine is difficult for the human being. So the machine will be able to process elements that are harder for the human being to process. And we will find here three different axes in terms of AI. But in terms of operations, we will have the capacity to bring up information that are flooded in terms of other information and find stuff that is lost in noise. And the second part is really to take off load from the analysts. In the SOC, really, the problem is that there are so many events arriving and people are submerged in events, and not all of them are attacks, otherwise we'll be in trouble. But they have to still address these. So it's to bring about this capacity to address this in real time, or almost in real time, all the events, and to delete 90% of the false positive ones, and to allow the analysts only the 20% that are perhaps really tentatives of vulnerability and compromising. And the last point, and perhaps it's a no say, but it's this capacity to have a centralized management of all of this. It's really the base of all of this is the capacity to visualize all the infrastructure, security infrastructure, and all the rules, and be able to act on it. So finally, it's adding a level of abstraction. It's really come out of the technologies and have really a cybersecurity approach on the products and technical. So this is the other important element. And this will bring about visibility and a different elements, different details, and obviously different COMEX and a technical manager will have different needs. And so this has to appeal to these different needs. And this technological approach and this vision, it's maybe we can summarize it easily. The first one is a platform type to have a federation and a level of abstraction that will allow to simplify something that at the origin quite complex, because we will deploy different types of technologies that will try and respond to the different risks. The second one is a flexible use, because we're not going to use security in the same way in a data center in France versus a cloud. And so to have something that's flexible and that will adapt somewhere in between, pay as you go, and a perpetual license and flexible payment on demand with respect to the different cases. The third point is really using AI in a massive way, and everyone is saying this in cybersecurity, is that this is a constant element. And we will have three types of different use of AI in this platform. The first one, which is quite classic, is the analysis of behavior. And the countermeasures we have today that are only based on databases are not enough. The antiviruses, the anti-malware, all of these, they work, but many things go through. So to solve this, we have something that looks at behaviors. So perhaps detecting botnets, for example, even if we haven't detected the executable of the botnet on the machine, if we see that this machine is connecting to a center of command and control, we can imagine that it's infected by a botnet, so we can put it in quarantine so that it can be cleaned up. So really many elements like this. They're not very innovative, but they work very well, and these are strong parts of cybersecurity. The second component, which is perhaps more rare, and this is more about machine learning, because this is behavior. This is deep learning and neural network, and this capacity to assist the analysts to be able to analyze the events to see if it's a false positive or not. So obviously, the AI today doesn't really allow us to treat 100% of cases, but allows us to respond on 80% of the cases quite quickly. So this is quite a big advance, because the analysts will have to look at only 20%, much less of the events that need to be looked at. And also the big advantage of this solution is that, in opposing way to the machines and systems that are based on auto-learning, like machine learning and deep learning, this system is pre-educated, having 10 years of experience, because this is something that we use already. Obviously, it might not be completely adapted to your environment, but today, if you turn the key, it starts, it works, and we won't have false positives. So that's quite interesting. The third use, which is not very used, is the plug and forget. So whatever the quality of the kind of solutions you're using and the equipment, if it's not well configured, it won't work. So perhaps the firewall in any accept, it's a nice firewall, but if it's not installed well, it's not really useful. So it's to avoid this. So there are things that are a lot more used on web application firewalls. So the web services that are there for the clients, there are continuous development, and we have several versions per day. So the WAF that was installed and optimized in a perfect way by the integrated on the D-Day, 20 days later, well, is not useful anymore, because it's incoherent with respect to the resource that had to protect. So AI here will allow for this configuration to evolve and have something that's always in accordance to the needs. And the last point is this unique element, and have this transversal vision, and to act on the overall infrastructure, cybersecurity infrastructure, from a unique point of view. So if we look at the comparison between the Fortinet Security Fabric and this cybersecurity mesh architecture approach of Gartner, we see that we will integrate these two. And within this, we will have 4 aspects to treat that are really the essence of cybersecurity. We will find, again, the first one, which is everything to do with threat, analyzing security, forensic analysis, everything that we will do from a cyber point of view on the whole perimeter of cybersecurity. And so Fortinet Security, it is a soul, which is part of the fabric, that we will look at reactive approaches, but also preventive approaches. One of the big aspects of this and advantages, especially on on malware, is that we have deep learning and we can protect from some threats that are not known yet, just looking at some of the characteristics. So perhaps that's an element, important element. And then we participate in different elements, in CERT, in zero-D research, and all of this is made available for all solutions through the fabric.
That's the first important level. The second important level, and if it hasn't been covered by the CISOs, then we'll have to do that quite soon. It's the issue of digital identity. That's very important because many breaches, many compromises are related to identification issues. We know that during the health crisis, we have seen an explosion of multiple factor identifications that we had to install very urgently, because in order to solve the identification issues and the passwords issues, we had to do that. Of course, this is one of the aspects. You can also have biometric elements and the supervision of the equipment, etc. But this is something that is extremely important, and there is a dual component related to this lack of trust. That's the identification of a person and the identification of the equipment used to be connected, because of course these are two important components. So here we have solutions that can be integrated in the fabric. And of course, these are Fortinet solutions, but we are quite pragmatic because this framework, this fabric, this platform is open, and we can integrate Fortinet solutions, but also solutions coming from third parties, from our partners who are also our competitors, because of course, sometimes people do not really want to have one single provider in the security environment. Then the third element is related to management. It's related to the centralized management of security policies and of the security position. So the policy management is something that we all knew about in the past with the policy management and the firewalls. Of course, here you can go further because you can look into the endpoint protection, the WAF, and a consistent procedure looking at all the equipment, developing security functionalities throughout the infrastructure. But you also have notions related to real-time, the management of your position. If there's a compromising incident, you can react very quickly and reinforce the security position and place some workstations in a quarantine. You can manage that in a very centralized way and in an orchestrated way, because one of the elements of this position is to reduce the position. We have two aspects related to security. You have the aspects related to protection, when you prevent the threat to get into your information system. Now, of course, this is not really efficient to fight against threats. And then you have detection, to detect a threat and to react before the threat has an impact on the information system. Now, good news, even if you have compromised workstations, if the attack is not completed and if you can stop the process, then you will win. There will be no impact on your information system and the problems will be very limited. So this can be done through all these management systems, the Forti Cloud, the Forti Manager with a unique solution, the policy management issues, and monitoring the digital experience. So this is a whole range of solutions, and the purpose is to provide for a centralized experience of security management. And then one last element about the dashboard. Very often it is said that you can only protect what you see. So it's really important to have this dashboard to manage the reporting, because of course you will not send the same information to an executive director or a sector manager. Then you have possibilities of having a centralized alert system, a centralized investigation system, simply to have a global overview of what is happening to your information system. And of course, there's a wide range of solutions with different granularity capabilities. And you can also compare your competence to other companies simply to see what is your position with regards to this cybersecurity position. Now, as I was saying, this security fabric is an open ecosystem, and so we can include a large number of environments. We can include third-party solutions, including solutions coming from competitors in those environments, in order to enable them to benefit from this integration and automation process. So just as a summary, I would say that we have a very broad range of techniques for security. You have a wide capacity for synergies, and then automation that makes things simpler. And then to conclude and to tell you about how it works in practical terms, if you look at the security approach and how you can combine these solutions, yesterday we were talking about vertical integration. Today we have two heads. So you have the network on the one hand with the one edge security, and then on the other side, you have a security-based approach with the SASE. And then, as Gartner and other analysts say, this is going to merge in the future in the cybersecurity merge architecture, in something that will be highly integrated. And actually, the promises of tomorrow are already provided today, because we already have this type of architecture. And we're going to make sure that we can apply that in very practical terms. So you do not have to roll out the whole system. You can actually choose the functionalities that you want to deploy today, and then make sure that they are scalable. And this is something that is very interesting, and I would like to give you two examples. The first one is quite frequent. It's the possibility to respond to a need for strong agility with important bandwidth and with important security parameters. So within this fabric, you're going to have to choose the functionalities that you want. So this is a SD branch. So we include the LAN dimension in this solution. And here we can integrate new generation firewalls, virtual firewalls, the LAN management, and the NAC, etc., to produce this secure SD solution with single workstations, etc. So that's the first example. The second example is related to issues that you're faced with when you have a certain number of remote users. How can you make sure you have a constant security level? Whether the user is at home, in the company, or with a partner, you need to guarantee the same level of security, and we can provide a response to this with the Zero Trust Edge, ZTE, that will actually give you security for the workstations, but also the capacity to identify and authenticate users and equipment. So new generation firewalls and virtual firewall and web gateway security. So we're going to choose the right functions in this architecture, and this gives me a unique solution where I can only choose the functionalities I'm interested in. Now, let's focus more on the Zero Trust solution. So the purpose is to respond to the need for integration and simplification of security architectures. And there's a need also to respond to this lack of trust in the information system, to respond to the need in terms of authentication for users and machines, whatever the environment, so internally within the company, but also for the remote users. And actually, this ZTE approach is promoted by Forrester. And actually, if you look at it closely, it's quite similar to the Gartner solution. They're actually saying the same things. The silo architectures are too complex. They are not providing an answer to the issue. And so we need an integrated approach. So let's have a look at this Zero Trust Edge solution. It will respond to quite simple needs. First, today users will connect and log into the system from anywhere, actually, from their hotel, their home, their company, different plans, different sites in the company. The applications and data are everywhere. You can have data centers on the premises for the legacy applications, but then you have public clouds. You may have data on the workstations of users, etc. So it will be important to secure all this. And of course, this needs to be secure, but it also needs to be in compliance with the regulation. You need to make sure that you comply with the rules, with the standards. And then, of course, this needs to be straightforward, simple, and fast. In the implementation stage, for example, you need to be able to centralize all of this. So you have SD-WAN, SASE, and other solutions. Now, in some companies, of course, it will be possible to be in one of those solutions. But in the long run, in the future, in medium-sized enterprises and large enterprises, you will have those elements combined. You may have SD-WAN, SASE, and I trust Gartner. I'm sure they will find another name for all of this, but there is this capacity to respond to the different environments. Now, this is related to the notion of convergence and consolidation of networks and security, because you will have one controller in the cloud in the long run. We mentioned FortiSASE, but of course it goes beyond this solution. And this will pilot the security either in the cloud for users who use the cloud, but it could also be covering the on-premises applications for those using SD-WAN or SD branch. This will be centrally managed, and of course this will be organized with a zero trust edge notion. So you have this safeguard to manage authentication for users and equipment to make sure that everyone has the right access right according to the level of risks they are exposed to. I just mentioned two examples, and you will see that this security fabric approach is interesting because it's responding to this need for consolidation, and it also responds to all user cases. Actually, you can just go do your shopping and make your selection with the work from anywhere solution, the ZTE solution. Then you can also focus on the issues related to deployment and the applications with migration to the cloud with the DevOps security approach. Then we can respond to the XDR problems and issues. So you can also select the right functionalities to have this global overview of security issues. We can also respond to other issues that are increasingly important today, and that's the securing of industrial sites, because unfortunately they're often targeted and people are not always aware of the risks, and they work in environments where constraints are very different when it comes to the time frame, for example. If you buy a production tool, you're going to buy that and use it during 20, 30 years, 60 years if it's a nuclear plant. And of course, this is a problem if you compare that to the IT timeframe. So you have to involve and integrate cybersecurity in all of this. So this is it. Thank you very much. I believe we still have some time. Should you have any questions or comments? And if there are no questions, or if you are shy, I would suggest you come and see me later on today. But I would like to thank you very much.